Gotcha. Oh, that works. That works. Okay, so now we're good to go. All right. All right. I'm Ben Woznicki, or Woz. Thanks for coming out. I've been to Notacon for, I think this is my third time. And I had a buddy last year who, or the year before, who made it a point to say, hey, you really need to go present something, get on it, and then you can bring somebody else. So I did, and I brought my brother. My little brother, who just happens to be a little taller than me. Let's see, video everywhere. The personal distributed high-def video network. So the problem I was trying to solve with this is really, it's about whole house audio video distribution. I wanted to be able to listen to my music everywhere. I wanted to not miss parts of movies. So if, my partner, Jennifer, is in the living room and I have to go in my office for a little bit, I didn't want to miss parts of the movie or have to make her pause it or rewind it or any of that. So I wanted to keep that conversation going. I had lots of rooms, but only a couple computers. So it's like, oh, I can have all these screens and have a computer or something hooked up to each screen, but then how do I keep all these things synchronized? So that was a problem. I've been using Apples for, 30 years, since the early 80s, but I have no desire to be locked into their walled garden. They're little secret gardens a pain in the butt. And when you want to move to something else or you want to use another product, they're like, yeah, go ahead, just do it without us. So while you can use AirPlay and have little AirPlay receivers all over the house, and it works pretty well, as soon as you want to hook up your Ouya or your Xbox to it or whatever, you're totally out of luck. So I wanted to have an agnostic platform that didn't care what we were using. All right, so that's the initial problem. Just a little bit of background about me, sort of my path. I've been into audio video for a very long time. We used to make speakers and amplifiers and crossovers, and then after I got out of college, I played at nightclubs and used to have house parties, and then finally got around to making this HDMI, to getting an HDMI matrix, and then turning that into, I'm in the middle of right now, turning that into my video network. It turns out there are some things the matrix just doesn't do or doesn't behave the way you'd expect it to. It makes sense, but it's not. We've come to have higher expectations from, Apple's doing things well, and there's often a lot of complexity that's hidden from users, and in the case of an HDMI matrix, that complexity is just kind of out in the open. So, engagement motivation. I'd like to have this somewhat two-way rather than just me lecturing. I think people are motivated by a lot of different things. Could be learning, could be helping others around them, or it could be more like Pavlov. So I brought some nerds. I figured that was appropriate. And if you like chocolate, some Butterfingers. So we've got a few things up here. And so throughout, I am going to try to solicit some feedback. What are your experiences? What kind of problems have you faced? What kind of solutions have you looked at? What things am I missing that you're thinking about? What I've come up with was not at all what I expected when I started. So I believe pretty strongly in emergent design and having a clear problem, finding solutions to the problem, seeing where it goes, doing the simplest thing that can work, and learning from that. Let's see. All right. So who here has built stereos or speakers and wired their car up? All right. What kind of problems do you run into in those environments? What worked well for you? What did you run into that didn't work so well? Harnesses. Oh, getting the stereo to actually fit. That didn't work. I guess. There we go. Cool. Right on. Any others? Prefab harnesses. I guess some of the things that I've seen, I guess on the upside with traditional audio video, usually things are pretty instant. You don't have too many latency issues. It's like a wire and a signal going over the wire, and that happens pretty quickly. When you get into the digital domain, all kinds of weird things can happen there and isn't quite what you expect. Other things, getting into the high def space, I still have a bunch of VGA level gear. I have a bunch of stuff that doesn't have HDMI ports on it. And I had no intention of rebuying all of this crap just because I didn't have a jack. Like, that didn't make sense to me. So having appropriate compatibility is important. Let's see, distributed analog audio. Anybody do this? This is kind of an outlier. Not too many people put the time and effort to get their whole house wired, much less AV. Yeah, we'll skip over that one. One thing I'm kind of into pretty heavily is creating environments and atmospheres and experiences. So for me, when I have a house party, it's not just a couple people over. It's about how is the sound spread throughout the house? Do I have to yell in certain areas, and in other areas I can't hear anything? What's my lighting like? How do I feel emotionally when I come into the room? Am I getting blasted by a bunch of light, or is there a good distribution? I feel comfortable. I'm at ease. Those types of things are important to me. So I kind of think this is maybe sort of an artistic perspective. I don't know, anybody run into any of these? I have more nerds to give away. Any environmental kind of experiences? Fair enough. All right. So my first HDMI matrix. So for anyone who doesn't know, just the basic, what does an HDMI matrix do? It basically has some number of inputs, some number of outputs. You can plug in whatever, your Xbox, your Blu-ray player, your Mac, your Apple TV, whatever into it. And you can display that on any or all or none of the screens. So, like, that sounds like pretty fantastic to me. Like, I can now hit 20 buttons and finally get the same thing to show up everywhere. Yes?
Does it solve the problem of the getting disconnected?
Getting disconnected from each other.
So I have a HD home theater PC on
Yeah.
amplifier regularly phenomenal. Whereas when I had Toslink, I didn't have that.
Yeah, so what I have found with HDMI is that there can be handshake issues, and I've had to like reboot everything, bring it down, bring it back up, and then usually they work themselves out. It tends to be either it works or it doesn't, but unlike regular wires with analog signals, it's more of I plug it in and I wait 15 seconds, and then I find out whether or not it worked. But that might be a driver sort of thing. Right. Oh, absolutely. You get, like, I'm on the road. Why isn't the TV working? Yeah, it's pretty significant.
Yeah, I had a like that with every time the computer would like and come back, I had no audio. I had to basically unregister the audio driver, install it, and pick right up. Or you could reboot, but either one was.
You had to uninstall it or reboot. She probably wasn't down with that. Yeah.
Apple
Right. Right.
give or take. Sometimes you need to do it
Yeah.
3 times.
Right.
Comes with value. A lot of these devices don't properly,
Right.
they don't the handshake properly. Never going to the handshake so that the device
Huh.
or you
Oh, does it like blacklist it briefly or something?
basically it never tries the handshake again. So you like whatever card you drive get updated proper.
Yeah, I went through the whole scope on
Yeah,
I had my formatted and I
That
don't know if I had
sucks.
different drivers the next time through, but didn't have that issue. But
Toolbox, you'll have to like toolbox. The whole protocol is highly flawed.
Right, it is, sure. Well, so this was initially, whenever HDMI came out, I had back then even been thinking about this whole distributed AV thing, like, oh, I've got to have my whole house wired, right? And I was rather crestfallen because I'm like, oh, it's got copy protection on it. So initially it wasn't supposed to, then here it comes. And there was the whole downgrading, degrading of signals if you went to an analog output and all of that good stuff. For whatever reason, the devices I'm using now are outputting to analog and it's high def. So I don't know what changed or if now we just get to ignore those original rules.
Some devices will
If you're cheap enough and aren't mainstream, that it works for me. All I know is it works. So yeah, yeah, cool. I think there was lots of discussion there, so lots of nerds, and so I think there's 2 over here, and another one back there, and another one there. Did I miss anybody? And our video guy? You're good, all right. All right. So, let's see. I knew I should have cut these bags further. All right, so my first setup, and this was in the late fall, October, something like that, of last year. Who here has used Monoprice? Yeah, they've taken a lot of my money, but that's okay. They have legacy adapters. They have a cheap matrix. Their matrix is $300 with extenders. So you can put all of your devices right next to the matrix, and you can run a whole shit ton of Ethernet cable around your house, and it'll go everywhere. So it works really well. They also have extenders that are pretty cheap too. They're like $40, $50. So if you want to, go ahead. Yeah, they say Cat 5, Cat 6. I used Cat 7, which kind of was a pain in the butt because it's a non-standard kind of connector. Yeah, well, they brand them at any rate. I don't know who makes it, but yeah. It's been pretty good. Once I got the initial, when you're installing it, you want to make sure you have a tester, make sure your cables are good. The whole having the right Cat 7 plugs when I had Cat 7 cable, that was a real pain. I had to go to a special distributor to get those. Initially, I was just like, I want the fattest cable with the most shielding, of course, but that had problems with it. Once I got the right gear, it worked pretty well. I do use extenders in conjunction with the matrix, so I can have my Mac Mini in the living room. It extends all the way to my office, and then from my office back to the living room, and it works fine. It does take a little while for the handshake to go through, right? Like there's a little bit of a lag, but once it's going through, it's solid. Yeah, it's definitely worthwhile. There is some other gear. Alibaba has some interesting stuff, and there's some new standards coming out like HDBaseT that are pretty cool. Yeah, so I got the matrix from Monoprice, my legacy adapters. Also, they have DVI and coax. I don't know if you want to call it a muxer, something like that, that encodes it into the HDMI. So if you have an older computer, or I was doing some low latency, like monitoring type stuff in my office, so I needed a little bit more control over that. So got all the gear, a lot of cable. I had a kind of a hard house to work with. It's a long house, and then I don't have any access to the ceiling to get wires through. So we actually ended up punching holes through the brick wall outside, running a dozen cables through it, putting a shroud over that from the front to the back of the house. I have an awesome landlord. I bought the hardware, he put it in. It worked out pretty well. But that was like getting the right cabling was pretty important there. Let's see. This is sort of your traditional model for your keyboard. Usually your keyboard's tightly coupled to your laptop, which is tightly coupled to your screen. With a, you don't get any, yeah, and I don't have a laser. With a matrix, basically you kind of chop through the top here, and you have a matrix here, which lets you show to both of the, either computer could show to both at the same time, or some number of outputs at the same time. But your keyboard is still tightly coupled to your computer, which is kind of a problem. So what kind of problems were they? I couldn't control my Office MacBook from the living room. So let's say me and my fiance were watching some TV show, and she ended up going to bed and continuing to watch it from there, and I'm in the living room and I want to watch anime. It's finally anime time. I could use my MacBook from the office, but I couldn't control it easily. I ended up with a little iPhone keynote thing. It's kind of kludgy. It works, but any real work, forget it. Because of course, although I have a keyboard sitting in front of me, that Mac Mini is tied up. She's watching something off of it. So the solutions I thought about, super long USB cables. Does that sound painful? You'd end up with multiple keyboards. You could do some switches. Still a bunch of stuff going on there. It sounds kind of nasty. What kind of ideas do you guys have on this? Hey, hang on. I have one here. USB extender. Do you want Nerds or Butterfinger? You're good. All right, all right, USB extenders. Synergy Plus, which is pretty good. We should talk about that one more. Okay, gotcha. Yep. I think I'm further than that though, and I have heavy walls, but is there any others? VNC. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of, well, we'll get to that one in a sec. There are definitely advantages to VNC. I'd like to explore the Synergy one, but I actually ended up using VNC for this project. Yeah, I have used a 75-foot USB cable. It has like a little hub in the middle of it, and then another one at the end. Yeah, right, absolutely. That still takes us back to the whole, I'm going to have multiple keyboards, or I've got to have some switching thing going on. So what I've tried to do here is, instead of having the keyboard coupled to the computer, I want to couple my keyboard to the screen. So my screen and my keyboard are a constant in the room. I don't know what they're going to connect to. I want to keep those together to connect to whatever computer there is. So what my current setup kind of looks like I've got my office TV, I've got my living room TV, I mean monitors. I've actually got one in the bedroom, one in the spa, all of that good stuff. And then in my office keyboard is hooked up to a Raspberry Pi. That Raspberry Pi is connected to the network and also has a serial cable connected to its receiver. And then in my living room, same thing, another Raspberry Pi. It's got a keyboard hooked up to it, and it's got a serial cable going to the matrix as well. So there are RS-232 jacks on both the big central matrix and the receiver. We do have a demo set up in the, I don't know what we call it, hackerspace room. Yeah. So whoever wants to come by and check that out, we can check that out. I would say it's partially done. It's definitely not done. It's been kind of an adventure in learning Linux and how do I set things up so that when you turn it on, like it all falls into place. Kind of, it's a process.
What about the IP KVMs?
Yes. So can
And
that
you get
do?
encryption too.
Yeah. Can that do multiple endpoints?
I never got to use one, but
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, we're talking equally as much as your matrix, though, cost-wise. It's not necessarily efficient or cost-effective. But they seem
Yeah.
really, really cool from what I
Yep.
looked at a while back.
The yeah, like I'm not going to. Yeah, when you say latency, you mean from when I hit a key to when I see a response on the screen? Yep. Yeah, for my experience has been for real world stuff, the latency has been acceptable. I might be really concerned about gaming on it, that sort of thing. So, right. And if you want a general solution, you'd probably need to address that, right? But Synergy might being a much more dedicated sort of protocol, or however they do it. Correct, but I don't need it to pass video. Yeah, which would make it much more lightweight. Yep. I'm actually trying to figure out how to turn off video in tight VNC. I haven't quite figured that out yet. So that's the basic layout. Any questions on this? Makes sense? Awesome. Okay. Serial control from the Pi. Each course keyboard can set its screen source. So I can hit F1 through F4, and that would be the same as going up to the receiver and hitting the button 3 times or whatever it would take. So I can just jump right to it. And then, of course, ideally, your keyboard control any computer. I'm partway through that. It is tightly coupled to tight VNC. They have there's a way to modify override what the keys are. I haven't figured out, like that seems like a bad thing to me. Like I shouldn't have that coupling in my software, but that's where it's at right now. Ideally, I probably would have some sort of watcher that just hangs out and based on what it sees, starts whichever services, right? Any other questions? All right. Okay. So the networked keyboard, VNC, that is what I'm using right now. Synergy seems like a really good way to go too. And we'll probably explore that. That was one that got brought up last week with someone else I was working with. I can see also wanting different, like maybe we should be using the right tool for the job at the time. So maybe for some sources, such as computers, we want Synergy or VNC. Maybe for other sources, like XBMC, we should be using their specific protocol to give us all of the features and responsiveness. Apple Remote, same kind of thing. That's got its own protocol. So the nice thing about VNC was it's It is OS agnostic. It doesn't care. I did try a couple different VNC servers. I've ended up using Apple's built-in. It was giving me like half the overhead compared to Tite and the other, not Tite, what else? Vino, I think was the other one I was using. So it was pretty lightweight. I'm sure if we can get it to not have to pass any of the video, that would really drop that down significantly. Liabilities besides that, with my current solution, Raspberry Pi can't do on-the-fly resolution changing. Like you need to kill your X session and start a new session, which might not be a horrible thing, but I haven't figured it out yet. And then, of course, learning how to hack Linux, that was kind of still is a challenge. It seems like it's a complicated tool. But part of my vision is to, once I have the right prototypes together and people see that it fits in, or am I able to discover the solution that fits in with what people need, then I have a real prototype. Then I can, if I need to get money, I can get money, start to deal with things like intellectual property, and if you're going to get a patent paying $30,000, like I don't have that sitting around. I don't know that it does you any good, but so that's VNC. Some installation gotchas, running the cable, kind of a pain. Sync issues and rebooting, we heard that from a few people. 5.1 encoding, a lot of endpoints can't handle the multi-channel stuff. They can handle 2 channels fine, but as soon as you send it 5.1, you get all kinds of noise, which can be kind of disruptive in the house. You start watching a movie over here and suddenly there's this noise from the next room. Not so great. The other thing I discovered is good analog to digital conversion. A good ADC is kind of, let's just say mono prices, ADCs blow. They kind of work, but they kind of sound like rubbish. So they never get loud. It never is going to bump. It's just going to sound really tinny and crappy. So I ended up, for instance, to get good audio on my network, I have a old M-Audio sound card strapped to my old Mac Mini, and I'm passing it through using monitoring and Audacity, and it sounds great. I'm sure there's some latency in there, but it's fine. All right, echoes between zones. This was the other latency challenge. For a lot of what I'm doing, there's a few different layers, and you're never going to get exactly the same delay from one room to another. So if you're in a room, it's usually fine. If you go and you're walking between rooms and they're playing the same content, you might hear right? It's not quite there, which for an audio geek is really annoying. But I've learned to temper my annoyance because all the other stuff is so much nicer, right? That's another interesting problem. At least for me, it's an interesting one. Seems like you just need some buffer for HDMI, and you tune your buffer, and voila. But with the copy protection and all that, that might be challenging. Other problem, Apple's DisplayPort. I don't know why this is. On my MacBook Pro, newest generation, I'm getting the options of 1080i or 480p. You can pick whichever one seems fantastic for you. Neither of those sounded that great, though. I have found that if I go to DVI and use their little DVI plus optical encoder, I get all my other options back. So I can do 720p or 1080p or whatever I want. What else is there? Oh, I think this is kind of a liability for the lower end matrices. There are sort of sync gaps between you switch inputs sometimes. So let's say she's watching something in the living room and then I'm in the office and I switch to it. It might drop out for a couple seconds before they both come back up. From what I've heard, though, the higher end gear is a lot nicer with that. And of course, the actual switching speeds better on those two. But this is a $300 piece, so it's pretty reasonable. All right, future vision. Auto switching keyboard to the correct source. So if we want to provide a seamless experience where you don't have to really think about what's going on, my keyboard should be able to sense, oh, somebody else changed the input. I should go to the right computer now, and I should be controlling the correct machine. Right now, it doesn't have it. I have to switch the input from my keyboard for it to be able to know what's going on. Privacy and broadcast modes. So if I'm writing up an email, guess what? It could be on every screen in the house, or watching whatever. It's everywhere, and I may or may not want that. Same thing with broadcast mode. Right now, if I want to broadcast what I'm watching through the whole house, I have to walk over to each endpoint and get it to the right input, right? So it works for that individual input, but it's not thinking about the whole situation. Or if I'm at the matrix, I can sit there and press every single button without moving, but I still have to keep hitting buttons. Wireless video. This is kind of an important one for mainstream adoption because people don't like to run cables because cables suck, but cables give you the bandwidth. And you don't have to worry about things like compression artifacts. And in general, if I can wire it, I will. I have a feeling that we definitely are seeing some interesting applications come out of mobile and wireless, but for high bandwidth, low latency applications, you can't beat a wire. Yeah. Any other thoughts on future stuff? Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
Based on where things are doing looking for Bluetooth things.
Yes.
Bluetooth receiver. Figure out which one your Mac appears on and turn that one.
Yeah.
That phone on, or in your case, that screen.
Yes. So initially, my first vision was, oh, I should have my inputs follow me. I was like, yes, this is awesome. But I was like, well, shit. Even if my input followed me, if I can't control the other machine, I kind of am losing that still. So I prioritized in my backlog. I said, okay, this is more important. I'd like to get to that. I did a little spike on it, started playing with the Bluetooth stack and Ruby and all of that good stuff. And that was not trivial either. Like, Apple's kind of picky about how it maintains connections off of their devices, and it only responds like every 2 minutes or something like that. It was kind of, I didn't spend that much time on that one yet, but I think that is a useful, like, to me, you want it seamless. If this is my identity, fantastic. Now I can walk around the house and it just, you have to do things like resolve conflicts, right? So what if somebody else is already in a room and I come in? How does it handle that? You have to figure that out. Maybe it kind of just puts you in a queue, and then when the other person leaves, or there's a way to override it and just say, nope, I'm on. Something, yeah. But proximity detections would be pretty sweet. Any other ideas? Yes.
You're looking to have, like, let's say you got your Mac Pro and one for your Mac, don't want to see. Get a program called Teleport that, like, drag your mouse off the screen. Like, if you have on the
Yeah.
image of your Mac made, it'll just show up on that other screen.
So teleport sounds very similar to Synergy.
Yeah, and like it works with the keyboard too. So if you drag your mouse over,
Is it-
your keyboard in.
Is it platform agnostic? Does it do Linux?
I don't know about Linux, but
It's licensed.
Oh, gotcha. All right. Okay, thanks. Any others? Anybody else want more nerds? All right. Let's see. Things I have to mention. HDBaseT. HDBaseT is a new standard. It's, I believe, lossless still, just like HDMI is lossless. It does run over Cat 5 to Cat 7. Instead of having to run 2 strands for each endpoint, you can run 1. And it also provides a 100 megabit network connection. So you go from 3 cables down to 1 cable, which is pretty awesome. Just don't plug it into any of your existing network gear because it's going to totally fry it. But otherwise, from 3 cables to 1 sounds pretty awesome. Alibaba does have, I went through their site, they do have one of the new 8x8 HDBaseT matrices. I don't know how much it was. Probably not too bad, but probably like $1,000 something. And wireless HDMI, it does exist. Monoprice has them. They don't go very far. And you know, as you go out, you're going to run into artifacts. And I don't know how many you can really have in the same physical proximity. So if I'm trying to go from, even if I have all of my sources at one spot, if I have 4 devices broadcasting out HDMI, you got to figure that's a lot of electromagnetic energy, and you're probably going to have some problems. It'll get there eventually, but I'm a wired guy. What else? Okay, so the video network. Advantages over other solutions. It's device and brand agnostic, doesn't care, because we're using HDMI. It's whole house and partitioned, so I can set, you know, maybe there's 2 rooms that I'm working between, and I'm going between those 2, and then she's in the front of the house, and she's between the bedroom and the living room. We can each be doing our own thing and have that partitioned. It minimizes controllers. And when I say it minimizes controllers, I'm saying that whole, if I have a Wi-Fi keyboard or a networked keyboard, I only have to have 1 sitting there. Of course, for the whole wife acceptance factor, it needs to actually work all the time. Kind of important. I think that's the Ben acceptance factor too, because I really don't want to screw around with it either. So that's the whole coupling the controller with the screen, not the source. And then it maximizes controller availability, right? The source is now coupled to the person. Well, it can be. That kind of gets into some other use cases. I've mentioned Emergent Design. This is in contrast to big upfront design. And this is kind of something I've been learning over the last, 2 years, 3 years. There's the whole, what is the simplest thing that can work? And identifying one thing and focusing on that, getting feedback, empirical feedback based on what it actually does and how it behaves once you've created it, using that feedback in your development cycle to decide where you want to go next. So I had started with just the matrix. I thought it was going to be great and solve all my problems. Then I got out in the real world and was like, oh, well, it doesn't do all these other things. And then I started to work on follow me sourcing. I was like, oh, this seems pretty cool. But in going through that, I discovered, oh, here's this other gap that is more important. So it's about having small, short development cycles, taking that feedback and learning from it. Any other features that I may have missed? We had the follow me. Yeah? All right. All right, last slide. WAS is for hire. I've been traveling on the road for the last couple years, and I just finished up my last gig like a month or so ago. Got back to Cleveland. I'm getting married in the fall, and said, oh, I should probably hang out here in Cleveland for a while. So I time-boxed what I was doing with the video network stuff, and starting next week is when I need to go find one of those job things. Not just interview when things come up, but be more aggressive on that. So I'm really interested in consumer AV, consumer electronics, and communications products. I think there's still a lot that we haven't really explored in the whole communication space, and that's what I'm most excited about. I am pretty heavily involved with the meetup community. Cleveland's Agile meetup has a session next Wednesday. We started a product discovery series, and we're doing one on, I guess, personas next Wednesday. So if anybody's interested in this sort of thing, I'd love to see you out. I won't be leading it, but I will be co-hosting. Let's see. I think that's it. Any other questions or thoughts while I'm up here? Yeah. Yeah, sure. I didn't talk about that. Good point. So there are receivers, and that's where your Ethernet cables plug into, or Cat5 technically. Cat5 cables plug into and your HDMI plugs into. And those have a button. You can just hit it to go through the 4 inputs. And it also has a little remote like that big. And it just has a couple buttons on it. Gotcha. On my keyboard, I have set that up so I can hit F1 through F4 and have that pick the inputs. It's pretty rudimentary still, but that is, it seems like I wouldn't want to get up, and I don't want another remote, and I already have a keyboard, so yeah. Somewhere back here I saw something. Gotcha. All right, myth. Right, because they've separated this, they've done the same thing, kind of, they separated the controller from the display. Gotcha. We'll check it out. Isn't that a fork of XBMC?
No. This TV came out before the
Huh.
VNC came out, and they started making front end for
Huh. Gotcha. Okay, that sounds like something. Yeah, I'd love to check it out. That sounds cool. Any other thoughts, questions? Yeah. All right, cool. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate your coming out. And I have more candy here, so you don't have to, you just have to come get it. That's kind of the trick. All right. Cool.